What's going on, and welcome to the Quarterback in Your Life podcast. I am your host, Keenan Reynolds, joined as always by my brother, my agent, my marketer, Mr. Che Mock. What's going on, Che?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Man, I'm doing well. It's been a pretty cool weekend, pretty good week for me.
Man, it has been a week since we last talked. It's kind of remarkable how much stuff has gone on, and especially, I mean, even in our area of Nashville, Tennessee, and just COVID and sports in general. And it's crazy how the NFL thought that they had, I think, gotten lucky, or maybe that the protections were there and that things were going smoothly, and then all of a sudden the Titans, man, I mean, that was wild to me, how all that sort of blew up so quickly and all the adjustments, and then everything else started to, move down the line with Patriots and Chiefs. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. First of all, I mean, I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal on Monday morning, and the Titans made it. I mean, they got a little section on the front page, and they got their own little page in the A section. So it's really crazy, and kind of reading the story of how it works out. Like it talks about the first positive test, I think, was the coach, and there's a big picture in the Wall Street Journal of the coach with his mask down, and he's like, obviously, he's reasonably within the social distancing, 6 feet, and you're coaching, so you're going to be talking at a higher pitch, and it's like the picture's clear as day, and he was the like quote unquote first patient that, and that his positive test apparently came in, like, Saturday for the Vikings game. So, definitely crazy, because he doesn't travel, right? And then the Titans go play the game, and I don't know if there was any communication between teams. I haven't seen anything on or either way as far as, "Hey, we had a coach," but I think just based on this picture I'm looking at right now, if you got a coach that's obviously, out in a high stress in a practice setting, talking loud, coaching around these players. I mean, it's common sense to think that maybe some of your players would be exposed. So
wait a
they
minute,
go.
so we're clear. The coach, because I want to make sure that the audience understands the timeline, because I don't know if I understood the timeline as such. So they had confirmed that on Saturday he was positive for COVID before the
Yes.
Titans left.
Yeah, so what I'm reading right now, what I'm literally looking at, it says on September 20, the very first person was this practice squad cornerback on the 24th. He got put on the COVID list. But
Mhm.
he had gotten signed like a couple of days earlier. So when you sign a player, they got to go through the point of care testing. Like it's a whole protocol for that. Like it takes like 3 or 4 days to get signed. So I guess he got put on the COVID list right after he got there. But then it says the following day, the outside linebackers coach was at practice. And then his test from that day ended up coming back positive,
Oh
and
man.
and that didn't register until Saturday morning before the Vikings game. And so now you got all the people that he may have come in contact with, what I'm saying, that he's talking, that he's coaching, that he's in the meetings with, what have you, are now going to play against another team. So now you don't really know. I mean, we obviously know how many players tested positive through the week, but you don't know, as you're going to play. If I'm a Vikings player, you don't have a clue until it all comes out on the back end of the game. And then, they had a week straight where they had like consecutive positive tests. I mean, it's really crazy to me. And I think, as a player, as a former player, um, like that's it's really a toss up every week that you go into these games. You don't know what's going on. I mean, things like this could happen. I mean, I'm sure the NFL is going to be very vigilant in their investigation and try to figure out. I mean, this picture doesn't help Shane Bowen's case at all, just because his mask around his neck. So, I mean, I would assume some fines are coming, whether or not they are quote unquote warranted. I don't know, but I mean, I think with as many players that were exposed to that virus, there has to be some gaps that protocol wasn't followed. I mean, I'm not in the building, so I can't really speculate too much on that.
Yeah, and you gotta wonder too. I mean, if those players um, were made aware, we're speculating a lot in terms of just timing and whatnot. But if the players on the Titans team were made aware, hey, Shane got a positive test, and we're still going to travel to Minnesota, and then you're putting the players at additional risk. right? Because all those players that were on that he coached specifically, position wise, plus the rest of the team on a plane, plus the team you're about to play. I mean, it just sort of it just continues to spiral, right? And
Yeah,
you're anticipating that the the virus, which we've come to learn with other uh, with other things that ended up happening over the course of the weekend into last week, which
yeah,
we'll touch upon. Um, it's extremely contagious, and it puts you in a hot spot, and it creates hot spots, and it moves around. So yeah, I'm interested to see what the league does with respect to the Titans, and the Titans. I hope, as a Tennessee Titans fan, I hope that the investigation leads to them saying that they didn't know, um, in time that he had tested positive and that the players had already gone, and all protocols were met. But it doesn't seem like it's starting to play out. And then the question becomes, is it worth it? I mean,
yeah.
it's a football game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NFL, they definitely dodged a bullet with this scenario. It just so happened that the scheduling worked out to kind of shift the game against the Steelers around. But one thing that's interesting as you kind of read on through this article, it talks about how on game day there were no tests done. Like that's the day that the NFL doesn't require there to be tests done, right? So there's even though you might test negative on Saturday, if you had been exposed, say Thursday, what if you're not shedding the virus until Sunday? And so now you tested negative leading up to Sunday. What if on Sunday you just so happen to be shedding the virus? And now all of a sudden, everybody that you touch, block, tackle, high five, yell at, whatever, they're all exposed. And I mean, it's a little bit of a gap. But I will say this much: I don't want to be too critical on the NFL because they're kind of. I really feel like the NFL model is kind of going to have to become the American model if we want to get back to real life. I mean, that's because they've conducted almost 500,000 tests through 4 weeks of the season. So they're averaging 100,000 tests a week if you do the math, simple arithmetic, right? I think until there is a vaccine that is not rushed, that is widely distributable, right? Because there might be a vaccine that works, but you only got so many doses, and who you like how do you have to go into prioritization, who do you give it to, who do you not give it to. So I think if there's a way to mass produce these um rapid tests, I think that's the best way for America to get back to work. So like before you come into the work off to the office, before you go to any I mean maybe not for like restaurants or malls or stores, but before you go to where you're like congregated like an office or an event, you have to have proof of a negative test. I don't know how you I don't want to get into how you police it or whatever because Che, I'm sure you could poke holes into that theory, but I think this is the most reasonable way, in my opinion, for life to get back to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah, I mean, I could poke holes in it, and I think I should. I will.
Yeah,
So
I encourage it.
there's there's constitutional questions that people can ask as to whether or not that's even allowed for someone to mandate that a person take a test before entering into certainly into maybe what would be considered a public facility. Um, but I
That's
mean,
why I
I think
said
that there's
maybe not like the grocery store or to your favorite
yeah,
restaurant,
yeah. Well,
but from a
those are
work perspective, from a work
yeah.
perspective,
Well, and even those grocery stores, favorite restaurant, I mean, those are private, right? I mean, they're not per se public, even though anyone from the public can walk into them, right? So I
yeah,
think from a protection standpoint, I mean, keep in mind that the Constitution, um, it's not necessarily set out to protect, um, citizens um, from the actions of private institutions, unless or until those actions become unconstitutional. And I know that sounds confusing,
yeah,
um, but more so, the certain protections that are afforded um, are protections that are afforded more so for you know the will of the public. And so, yeah, I mean, but then again, you can ask people to willfully consent so that their safety
yeah.
is treated at high.
I don't see why it's a problem. I mean, I just feel like people are clamoring for normalcy, right? You want to get back to like you want to get around people. So if that's the hurdle you have to go over, like I don't see why. Like I just feel like that's more of a like a public good thing. Maybe I'm naive to think that that's something that can be done. I mean, especially when we look at how masks have become politicized somehow, some way. And there is there is a culprit for that politicization, but nonetheless, I mean, I could see how that would cause some problems, but I don't understand. I mean, just from a basic human decency standpoint, I want to get back to work. I want to go, enjoy events, live events, go to, do these things. So if you have more availability to test yourself before you leave the house, like maybe that can invoke a little bit of social responsibility to be like, hey, listen, I left, I tested positive. I need to stay in the house. Like that just for me, that's just how I'm thinking. I'm thinking from a perspective of the betterment of everyone. You know what I'm saying? The whole before self type of deal. But
Yeah, and
um,
I well,
and that might be the military in me, I'm ship make self, but you know,
you said the whole before self, and I think I think you hit the nail in the coffin there. You would hope that people would think the whole before themselves, and I think we can maybe even um, parallel this to COVID in general. I mean, we're talking about COVID in sports, but and because I mean, let's quarterback through some things and think about sort of how this plays out from every um, life point because we want to go back to normalcy, right? But then
right?
you see like what else happened over the course of this last week and last week at post debate, right? We come to find
Yeah,
out, shortly after the debate that Hope Hicks, senior advisor to the president, has coronavirus. And
yep,
it seems then that it was probably found out on Wednesday, speculative.
yep,
Um, and then that um, the president then traveled to a fundraiser um, and attended another event. Now, though, keeping in mind that the debate was Tuesday, um, and so who knows whether or not Hope had tested positive before then. We know she came out on the day after. So we do know that much because obviously it would have been public and national news. And everybody would have known about it had anybody from the administration tested before the debate.
yep,
I can't fathom what type of outlash there would have been had um, President Trump walked across that debate stage and tried to even fist pound Joe Biden or had like gotten any closer. So
yeah,
fortunately, some level of precautions were followed on the debate stage. But at the same time, you mentioned whole before self. Well, there are pictures and videos of the whole of the Trump family in the debate hall being
without
asked to
mask.
put a mask without
Yeah,
mask on and then
yeah,
refusing to do so. Um,
yeah. It just
the idea
it doesn't make
at a
sense to me.
hospital, by the way, at a hospital, at the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
here's
yeah,
a personal mass story for me, right? So I was with someone who ended up testing positive for the coronavirus. While the majority of the time I was with them when we were not in the house, and even when we were in the house, we were not in like a within 6 feet. I tried to keep my distance. I mean, reasonably, so I wasn't going to be unreasonable, right? But we went out. So we went out to eat, went to a couple bars here and there. Maybe highly irresponsible on my end. I'll admit that. But while I was out, I had my mask on the entire time. Did not take it off. Even though those around me may have been uh, unmasked. Right. Come to
mhm.
find out, a week later, person I'm around test positive. Fortunately, I was like not shortly after they tested positive, I went and got tested myself, tested negative. So, I mean, masks do work. And then sometimes things just happen. And that's not to say the person that tested positive wasn't wearing their mask because they were, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you're around a whole bunch of people, anything can happen. But I mean, there is science that says that masks do work. So I don't really understand. Again, going back to your point about the Trump family, like it's become politicized. Like it's almost like a across the aisle thing. Like the blue side, they love the mask, and then Republicans are like kind of anti-mask. Like if you think about the justice or the nominee for the Supreme Court Justice Barrett, right? You think about that their ceremony in the Rose Garden. There's like three or four people in the audience. Could have been more, but three or four in the picture that I saw that had masks on. But whereas everyone else doesn't have masks on, and there's probably maybe I don't know 100 people in the Rose Garden. So it's like clearly a like I don't know, it just doesn't make sense, and then we saw what happened with that about that. We saw what came of that. We saw you got the Hope Hicks, and then it spirals to the president and the first lady,
Well, that's not
and then
even
it
let me interrupt too, because again, I'm just gonna draw the parallel. I'm gonna bring the parallel back to sports and back to sports as it pertains to schooling and college sports. You had the president of Notre Dame at
yeah,
that at that swear or at that announcement, who was maskless and caught the virus. Who,
yeah,
in the same vein, weeks or months before, had berated against students for being careless
irresponsible.
and irresponsible,
Mhm,
um, and then has to issue a public apology saying that he was sorry for being careless and irresponsible. The irony is just it's remarkable, and it doesn't make sense that it crosses party lines because it's not a party issue.
very
Science should
science,
never
yeah.
be an issue of politics.
Yeah, and to your point about, the reverend, I thought about it like this. I try to, like, not be as critical about the whole situation, right? So I'm thinking, okay, maybe, you gotta get tested before you even get in the White House. So if everybody goes in that thing tested negative, they're like, "Well, we good. Like, I'm taking my mask off." Like, I would be thinking that way. I'm not gonna lie. Um, so I get it, right? But at the same time, we see as it relates to the Titans, going back to the Titans situation, just because you test negative one day, I mean, and that, I mean, it could be applied to myself as well. But like, just the way this thing works, there's really no way to like think, oh, we got to predict it. Like we know exactly what's going on. Like because things change so fast as we see, and even on Tuesday, um, more and more information is coming out talking about more and more people tied to the White House inner circle are testing positive for coronavirus. So I mean, we see that this outbreak doesn't discriminate. Doesn't matter how much money you got. Doesn't matter what political affiliation you are. Doesn't matter if you play professional sports. It's yeah, I mean, it's coming straight down the line, doesn't care.
Yeah, and it 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 I think it behooves the American people to assume that we've got this under control, from a scientific standpoint, or from a um, vaccination standpoint, or from a healthcare standpoint. I think,
Far from it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it was, I think after this whole past week of seeing sort of, the president of the United States, pretty scary. And you could probably speak to this even, and from a military standpoint, I would assume, but like, when the commander in chief, and the most powerful man in the world, and the most powerfully, or probably the most secure building in the world, comes down with a virus, and then has to be taken and flown to Walter Reeves Hospital, that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, from
Yeah.
like, and I mean that just wouldn't that. I mean that sort of. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the protocols
Yeah,
internally, and
I, there is a plan in place in that type of situation. I'm not. I'm not gonna like get into the details or whatever. But I think one thing to note about that whole situation of the president going to the hospital, I think it just continually, uh, I don't know, brought about the realization of how this whole administration has kind of dealt with this entire pandemic. And by that I mean the information that was coming out when we were waiting on the doctor to brief, and when the doctor did brief, and people were he was like, he's looking good, everything's good. People were asking him about if the president was on oxygen, and he was deflecting. I know the doc was probably in a tough spot, right? Because from a doctor's perspective, he's like, they don't really have a political agenda. They're just trying to, these are the facts, this is what it is. But I'm sure, I mean, the announcement was supposed to be at like 11 a.m. Eastern, but it took like 45 minutes for them to actually come to the podium. So I'm sure that entire time, everybody's trying to figure out, okay, so what do we say? Because that the journalists are going to ask questions that if you answer them the wrong way can like certainly affect, it can affect, I mean, it was a weekend, so markets maybe not as much, but it can affect just national confidence in the entire executive branch, right? When its head is sick. So trying to navigate as a doctor, as a military doctor at that, trying to navigate through that process. I know it was tough for him because I don't think that, Dr. Sean Conley um has a political agenda. I think he's just kind of, I mean, there is a chain of command, right? So there is a way that he has to deal with that. So kind of hearing him trying to get through that. And then there was the conversation where he was like, we're like, what he said, 72 hours from diagnosis. So now all the media is running with Trump was he got tested positive on Wednesday. Then he went to the fundraiser event. So now the fundraisers are pissed because they like, damn, you got us out here exposed. And I know them fundraisers. I don't know, I don't know who it was, but I know they probably old as hell. They like, damn, damn, you know what I'm saying? Like we old and you exposed us knowingly. And they wasn't masked and they wasn't 6 feet apart. So that's all that's happening. Like on I think it was Saturday, maybe Saturday morning all that's
Yeah.
happening, and then they gotta come out, and then they gotta issue what we meant. We were meant 3 days, where Thursday is the first day, so now you gotta backtrack, and I guess it came out this over the weekend that he tested positive with a rapid test on Thursday. Now, I don't know if he went to the fundraiser after he tested positive. That remained I don't know. I'm a little fuzzy on those details. But he didn't say nothing. But I mean, that makes sense though, right? Because there's been talk. I mean, even in the NFL, some of these rapid tests have reported false positive. We saw that with the Saints. I think one of their fullbacks tested positive, and I mean that was just like a compounding weekend, right? You got the Titans, the consecutive positives. Then you got Cam Newton, superstar quarterback, goes out the Saturday before the game, positive, and now you got the Saints testing positive. Now everybody's like, damn, they about to shut the whole NFL down. And the president said, like, it was just like for about, I don't know, 24 to 36 hours Saturday, I feel like it was pandemonium.
Well,
It
you you brought up a couple, but just to clear the narrative too, and there's so many things there. You know, one going back to the what happened on Saturday, what was and God bless that doctor. You could tell he just felt awkward being on that podium.
yeah,
Uh,
that was
and
tough.
you could just see sort of Saturday and Sunday, you could just see sort of in his eyes like they're like, please help me get out of this. And like, well, we were just trying to keep
He's a
confident.
doctor, he's not a politician, you know, so you can't expect him to know how to navigate the political press.
And you would hope that like that like from a preparation standpoint, and I know this doesn't apply because like we as a public, for people in public office, we deserve to get the information. So, presumably he can't go up there and say, well, that's protected by HIPAA, but he sort of did eventually. Um,
Yeah,
I don't want to
about
talk about
the lung situation.
the lung situation, the questions regarding pneumonia, the questions about how low the oxygen level went. I mean, it was just sort
But
of
they ended up saying the oxygen level, that information came out.
well, but not to the exact level. He said below 94 or 97% or something like that. It wasn't, he didn't say how low. And I mean, I
Yeah,
think he said it was a point of concern because below 90, it's either 94 or 97. I believe 94 is concerning.
94.
Yeah, it went below 94. So you inevitably got to that. But what I saw a lot of people discuss was how it was misleading. It was like
Yeah, it
it was
definitely was.
it was jabbing towards a question one way versus just answering the question or just saying, we're not going to disclose that. I mean, I think
Right.
that's a
I think that
big
would've
way.
went over I would've went over a little bit more smoothly than how they decided to handle that situation, which again, is a doctor, not a politician, so that's not something that he's trained to know how to do.
Yeah, and so I wanted to make a point of that, but then like the whole Mark Meadows thing, right? Like when you hear about like Trump's irate at Mark Meadows, like it was so crazy because I'm like, this can't be real. Like the doctors come out there and say one thing as rehearsed, and then
Yeah.
Mark Meadows speaking from like his genuine concern,
Undercuts
like
everything.
like if you are my like you are my client, right? But like if you're in the hospital, doctor comes out, says something because you want them to say it a certain way. And then somebody comes to me and I'm genuinely concerned about you because I care about you. And they say, how is Keenan? And I say, I mean, we have a high level of concern for Keenan because he's not feeling well. You
Yeah.
would think that you would appreciate Keenan, like, yo, Che, thank you for like telling people that like you were concerned about me. But rather on the flip side, I just thought it was so entertaining. Not
Yeah.
entertaining. No one being sick is entertaining, but it was just par for the sort
The
of
way
thing.
it was handled was interesting. I mean, from the Mark Meadows situation, right? So I remember, like, literally right after the doctor left, CNN was like, "We had this anonymous report talking about the high level of concern." Then it turns out that the chief of staff was the person that was behind that quote that they read on air. And so I'm like, if I'm the chief of staff, I don't really understand them. Honestly, I don't understand the motive for him even being in that situation. Like, if politically you're like, we're going to project this with what we've done for our doctors, right? Then once the doctor leaves, everybody leaves. Like, let's go in. So from that perspective, I would say, thanks for caring about me, Mark, but shut the hell up. Like, let's regroup, let's get this thing figured out. But sending an anonymous statement like telling a completely different story than what was prepared. It makes the doctor look bad. I mean, he's a military officer, so it makes him look bad, you know what I'm saying? Like, it questions his credibility. You know what I'm saying? Like, that had a lot of unintended consequences. Maybe it was, and you're probably right. It was probably done out of genuine concern for the president, which is completely fine. But it's a unique situation because the president isn't, your average citizen. He's the most powerful man in the world. So you have to deal with things differently. And honestly, the whole thing reminded me of an episode of Scandal when Fitz got shot and he was in a coma and they were trying to pretend like he was making decisions, but he was still in a coma. Like that's how that whole situation made me feel like that's what it reminded me of. So I'm sitting there like, damn, Scandal kind of hit this one out the park as far as how this situation will play out in real time if there was a question about the president's health. Because I mean, you got a whole host of things that the president has to deal with, and if there's any inclination that he could be in a weakened state or out of his right mind to make a competent decision, that's a snowball effect, and it could really spin out of control quickly.
Yeah, I didn't think about it like that, and that's sort of why I wanted to get your perspective on, or I'm glad to hear your take on, from just a military standpoint, from a officer standpoint, because your perspective is going to be so different than what the average person thinks about, right? I mean, like, because you're right, from a national security standpoint, we need to protect that information as much as we can. And so I think it's prudent to see both sides. It's good to see both sides and see not. And when I say both sides, I don't mean politically both sides, red versus
Yeah,
blue, because we over politicize. I mean like perspective of like mad versus happy, like mad at the fact that he came out and said something like, "Hey, he was concerned." Because my perspective is like, you you have a heart and you care for this human being, you care
yeah,
for this man. He's your president and you're his chief of staff, so we're concerned, right?
yeah,
And but you're right. It's construed from the media in any form as, okay, something doesn't run course here because you've got the best doctors, military doctors in the world, treating the president of the United States with like tremendous amounts of drugs and like untested cocktails and things like that. Like,
yeah.
you know,
The
so
top COVID, the best you can get to treat your COVID.
yeah, so you got all that going on, and then them coming out and saying, "Oh, he's better than average" or whatever. And so
Yeah,
I see what you mean. That did create a lot of confusion.
yeah,
Well, getting back, but a couple things you said, and I think you made some good points. The whole versus self, man. Like that's I think at the end of the day that has to play true, because I think and you correct me if I'm wrong. You said something that I thought was contradictory in that you said for us to get back to some level of normalcy, be we're gonna have to be good citizens who are gonna allow ourselves to be subjected to tests before we go in somewhere.
right.
Uh, and then you said, though, that the rapid tests sometimes give false positives,
Yep,
or that they are not always accurate, right? Um,
yeah,
and so I want to make sure that the audience hears that. But what you also said was that you got to put whole before self. So, damn it, why are we politicizing mask? Because if that's truly the case, and this sort of ties everything I think together, right? Like
mhm,
with the two of the Titans, um, like if the coach had worn the mask, who's to say what would have happened? Who knows, right? But like
right,
I think it's why the NFL week one, we're all watching Sunday games and not realizing like how many coaches I think, we're not wearing masks. Then we watch the Monday night football game with the Raiders. And after they'd already announced the fines
he got
earlier that
fined
Monday,
he got fined.
because
Yeah,
Belichick and I think was it Raiders Patriots that game? Or
I don't know who the Raiders were playing. I don't think they were playing the Patriots, but the Raiders have actually been fined twice, for COVID violations, mass
yeah, so
violations.
yeah, so you see that, right? And so and you sort of you're thinking about it like, and I guess in my mind I'm thinking about it like, well, I mean they're all out there, they've already been there together all week or whatever, but like that gets right to your point, right? Like you're saying that they don't test them on game day, um, and even if they did test them on game day, we're realizing that there's not 100% level of accuracy. So what else can you do other than to take the extreme precautions? And I use the analogy, and I think this is a good analogy. It's like people are like, well, there's no way to protect against this virus entirely, or mask. mask, whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, so if I get in a car and you tell me, hey, we're gonna drive 90 for the next 10 miles. I don't care.
Click,
Stop sign. I don't
click.
care.
I'm putting that seatbelt on.
Not only you gonna put that seatbelt on, but you gonna make sure that there's an airbag in that car. And you might ask, hey,
Hey,
are
I'm
the side
holding on. Look, I'm I'm holding on and everything, man. Like I'm on a
you
roller
hold
coaster.
on because you don't want to die. So it's
Yeah.
like I'm like when I hear people talk about like, oh, we're going overly, like, oh, we're doing too much. I'm like, well, I agree, right? But we don't have seatbelts in cars and airbags in cars and rear view cameras in cars and side
Mhm.
view blinkers that tell you when a car's turning left or right, or side view mirrors, or so many. We take these extra added precautions not
Right.
because we think that people don't know how to drive, although people don't know how to drive sometimes. It's because we're putting sort of the whole before self. We're putting
Right.
the safety of those in the car and everyone else into consideration before
Yeah.
we're thinking about ourselves as manufacturers of vehicle, or ourselves, or the
Yeah.
manufacturers.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
safety
yeah,
protocols
yeah.
that have been put in place that require those things
Yeah.
because we know they protect you, right?
Mhm.
Um, so could you imagine if, I guess my point to, so I want to draw those contradictions to your statements, not because you were saying anything that wasn't accurate, but I'm saying, if people hear that and say, well, wait a minute, you said this or that, it's not that you were saying that, hey, the
It's the
only way,
reality.
it's the reality. It's not the
Yeah.
only way we can, but we have to. I think people should, or maybe should take into consideration. Hey, I take this rapid test, but even if I get this rapid test back and it comes back negative, that doesn't mean I can go in here and sit the whole time maskless, or should.
Mhm.
Maybe I will, but I need to understand that the risk is still,
Yeah.
it's less high, but it's still there, right?
Yeah. I think as it relates to that you made a lot of great points, and I'm glad you pointed out the contradictions to kind of just put the reality in. I thought that the seatbelt and the protections in the car was a great analogy because you could have all of that and still pass away from an accident, God forbid, right? But you can't say that you didn't do all that you could do to protect yourself. And at that point, whatever had happened as a result was just it was meant to be. You know what I'm saying? It was your time to go. And when it's your time, no matter what protections and things that you try to do, it is what it is, right? So knowing all of that, bringing all of that kind of full circle, I think the actions post hospital are dangerous. The things that were said are very should be people should be putting red flags up because to come out and be like, we got the best drugs in the world, best doctors in the world, which is true. Um, you can don't let it dominate. You can beat it. Hold on. Not everybody gets experimental drugs and gets the experimental cocktail and gets the remdesivir. I think that's how you say it. And
Yep.
then gets the steroid, gets all of that. Nobody gets airlifted from the White
At the
House.
outset, at the
Yeah,
outset of the
at the
virus.
very
I mean,
beginning, it's like day after you test positive, you're airlifted to the hospital for an abundant out of an abundance of caution, right? And you not everybody has a fully staffed 24/7 White House medical unit at home that can make sure that if anything happens, we'll be right there to administer aid. Not everybody has that. And in the context, especially for some of the things that were talked about and that have been talked about as it relates to healthcare, complicates that entire process even more. So, yes, I'm glad that the president beat the virus. I don't ever wish harm on anyone, regardless of anything, right? That's just how I'm built. Uh, but it's very reckless. It's just encouraging the spread, especially in a time as we're going into now in fall, where the flu is about to become another issue for everyone to deal with, right? So you have to be. It's just I thought that was really reckless and you got to be really careful how you throw it out there. And then I didn't see how the media on either end. I mean, I saw how one end portrayed it, but I didn't see how the other end portrayed those statements. But you got to be careful how you perpetuate that because people take it and they believe it. And one thing that me and you've talked about is how people psychologically think as it relates to what the leader says. So you take all that information and you internalize it and believe it to be true, even though it may be misleading or inaccurate, right? So I thought that was dangerous. And then I also thought it was interesting that the comparison again came back to the flu. Um, I don't know if you saw that tweet that was actually fact checked, as it relates to like the flu kills 100,000 a year or something, some wild number, right? And that was fact checked by Twitter and Facebook. So like again, more, very reckless statements because it's clearly not the flu. Because, the flu for most people, you stay home for a few days, you get beat down, you take your Theraflu, you take your Tylenol, and then you back. You know what I'm saying? But you had to go to the hospital and receive experimental drugs. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's
Yeah.
not the flu. Like, it doesn't matter if you beat it or not. Like, that's serious. People are still dealing with the after effects. We don't even know what the after effects totally are or going to be. Like, that shit's scary, man. Like, so I say stay vigilant because I just think that all that was said is just it's a slippery slope, man. And it's a really the wrong time to be having that conversation. And to say the vaccine is imminent. That's kind of the tone that I'm getting from all these announcements.
Yeah, well, and I think it's I mean, I get back to that whole before self, I mean, it takes, um, a level of selflessness to admit when you have ever been defeated. But it also takes a level of selfishness to be sometimes a good leader or to be um, a good uh, maybe businessman, right? Or whatever, right? You can say a whole lot of things, but I think selflessness certainly is a characteristic that you want in people who are guiding your health care.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so it's why doctors, you would hope, have a level of selflessness. And and I'll even use it in my comparison as a lawyer. It's why lawyers, we have to take an ethical exam because we don't want unethical people out there, people who are selfish, who are only their ethics don't come into play when they take into consideration the well-being of others. You don't want that. You don't want that in a lawyer. Doctors have to take ethics, and keep up with ethics and stuff too. So it's a level of selflessness. So if and it's why Dr. Fauci, I think he may rub some people the wrong way in the things he says, but I think it's why he can, I think, so easily adapt to any level of political spectrum, whether it's
Yeah.
left or right, or whether you're talking to Chris Wallace or Chris Cuomo, whether whatever, however people want to categorize folks and
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Um, he's selfless in the sense that he just wants to get out facts.
Yeah.
He just wants to let people know this is what this is. This is how we have determined you can protect against it. And here's what you need to
Mhm.
take the precautions and do. And where I don't see that level of selflessness in some people, and I'm not necessarily pointing this out to necessarily say it's the president, but what I saw, and it was characterized in some headlines as liberal media goes crazy because Trump decides to take a joyride around Walter Reed to say hi to his adoring patriotic fans.
Peak selfishness. Peak
That
selfishness. You
the
can't frame that any other way.
you know that and Keenan, I mean, whether you can speak to this is factual, and I know this based on just doing research, but the president's SUV is it is built to avoid chemical attack as well as like it's bulletproof.
Yeah,
I mean, so
ballistic explosions and stuff like that.
it's bulletproof, and but it's also like to avoid like chemical attack. So like it has literally, I think the term is her. It begins with an H. Um, nonetheless,
We'll Google it.
hermetic or hermetic or whatever it is. We'll say it at the end of, or we'll have one of our statisticians look up the word, who's on here, and they'll tell us here in a second. But um, it is made to avoid chemical attack. So if you get in that vehicle with someone, you're in. The air's
You're
tight.
sealed.
You're
Yeah.
sealed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Two people in that who were driving that, whether or not they willfully did it or not, whether or not they're wearing PPE. they're less than 6 feet from you,
It's
they are at
reckless.
risk and then have to go
Yeah,
into quarantine.
that shit
Yeah,
reckless.
no
That
other way.
shit reckless, man.
That is
Yeah,
insane to me.
yeah, I mean, look, I'll say this much. I don't want before I we dig into this, like people are gonna be I don't want people to be like, oh man, these dudes, they just want to criticize the president. But I mean, it ain't like we're just kind of pointing out just obvious things, right? Like that's just obvious. Like I just feel that that whole thing was selfish. Like there's no need. Like just to see your supporters, you don't want your supporters to be disappointed. Like you have a COVID. Like you're in the hospital with COVID. Like why why as a why as a supporter would I be mad that you didn't get out of quarantine um and that you didn't put others at risk to come wave hello to me. You know what I'm saying? Like I just it doesn't make any sense to me, right?
I don't want people to, and so yeah, I don't want people to perceive us as that either. But my point was more so not even necessarily to call the president selfish,
The
but
act
to say
itself.
maybe that lacked the quality of being selfless.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think
because
we're isolating that particular action.
I say that particular action, yeah, because I just think that again, I'm not saying that he's. You can be one can be their own determinant to determine whether or not someone's selfish.
Yeah, it's
I'm saying
definitely
to
subjective.
have the quality of being selfless is to put others before you. And
Mhm.
so I think that understanding the level of cocktails and treatment that he got, understanding the danger of this virus, understanding that there are people home whose mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, cousins, uncles, children died from this virus. Understanding that and then to after getting the best medical care in the world, after being airlifted from the White House on the day after it was confirmed you had the virus because you had low oxygen levels, and you were receiving oxygen, and there was all these other things. For 3 days later, to then go home, 4 days later, whatever it was, to then go home and stand on the podium of the White House with others around you within 6 feet,
No
and to
ask.
take a mask off and be concerned about the image that it portrays is not selfless.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's selfish. It's not selfless. And that to me is concerning, um, in the sense that I hope, because he is our president. I hope that he is okay and he defeats this virus. And I
For sure.
certainly hope that no one else in the administration catches this virus other than those who've caught it. But if the doctors who are selfless say you got to wear a mask, don't take off the mask. You gotta you need to wash your hands. You need to do X, Y, and Z, and you constantly do the opposite.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, listen,
so
it's crazy and you know, for me, COVID's kind of a it's a sensitive topic because like we're talking about this, but like you never know. Like we could be in the same situation, you know? So definitely aware of the magnitude of this virus. Definitely trying to do everything I can to keep my family safe. I have high risk individuals in my family. So doing what I can to keep them safe. And I've definitely made mistakes on that end. And I'm not too proud to admit that. Yeah, so you know, as I think about all the things that have been said, the tweets, the things about the stimulus, you know, I think in an election, and you know, we're less than 30 days from the election, right? I just think a lot of the things the president has said on these critical issues, he's been missing the mark, man. I feel like the right statements could have locked this election in for the Trump campaign. Like
he could have won. Yeah, he could have already like
the
all he
right
had. All he has to do is just like recognize that there's a virus
just
and
there is
like
a virus. It's
and just be
dangerous.
chill.
Wear a
Yeah,
mask. Let's get the stimulus bill out. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? Like it's simple. Like let me denounce, as we talked about last week. Let me denounce white
Okay.
supremacy. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Like
Like
and
it's really like check. He could have. I mean, because I don't think I think if there's any other like somebody on the red side that can convey these things a little more clear, for the overarching public, they blow Joe Biden out of the water. Like, I don't in my opinion, I don't think he as much as I am gonna vote for him, I don't necessarily think that he is, like, the strongest candidate in the world. So, what I'm saying is, like, this situation has been easy, like, going all the way back to the way he could have handled the pandemic could have been a landslide for him in this election. You know what I'm saying? Because all the thing, like the way that the people put money, you put money in people's pocket, they're gonna like you. You know what I'm saying? And that leads me to the grand point, and I'm I want to hear what you got to say about it. But as it relates to the stimulus issue, you put money in people's pocket, they're gonna love you for it, no matter what happened prior. So I just think there's been a lot of big misses in that campaign where they could easily run away with this election. And I mean, even still, I mean, we're still a month away, less than a month away. Anything can happen. Still got 2 more debates. Anything can happen. So we'll
But
see,
people
but I'm just thinking up until this point.
are voting. I mean, people are voting now, and you brought up stimulus, and that's a huge point because just Tuesday, they announced or the president tweeted out. I think that's what you're talking about. The president tweeted
Yeah.
out that he said he's going to tell his camp to stop talking to the other side about the stimulus bill, which people have been waiting on since what beginning of September, right? Or beginning remarkable.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's been I don't understand the negotiation piece. I mean, I'm starting to dig into the whole, on my own study time, kinda digging into the budget policies and how these fiscal, relief packages or whatever affect the government, and everybody talks about the deficit, blase, blase. A lot of it, for the layman is pretty confusing. So I've been trying to do some research on my own to try to figure out like, let me cut through the chatter and the noise and figure out like what does this really mean, right? But nonetheless, like even beyond that, there can be no substantial economic recovery without middle class and small and medium sized business recovery. And those are the people that are hurting the most, right? Wall Street's doing well, but I mean, I don't think in this case it's indicative of the true nature of what's going on. And Che, you're a small business owner, so you could definitely speak to how that has affected you personally, and how a stimulus can help you personally.
yeah, I
So
mean, for sure, for sure. Go ahead.
no, I mean, I really want to hear what you guys say about that.
Well, I mean, like, absolutely. I mean, look, as someone who has a small amount of employees, and someone who's I'm 5 years into my business, and pre-COVID, I thought that the trajectory was strong, and post-COVID, I hope that the trajectory remains strong. But I've had to adapt immensely, and you know, um, the stimulus helped me keep my business operational, the
Yeah.
original stimulus, but it's
Mhm.
run out. Not only am I a small business owner on the agency side of things, but I have some investments in real estate,
Mhm.
which my real estate investments were based on short-term renting, Airbnb,
Mhm.
VRBO renting, and all of that went from substantial to zero, literally
In the blink of an
uh,
eye.
within the blink of an eye. And I was looking at my 2020 outlook in March and April, almost with tears in my eyes of what am I going to do? Unfortunately, the stimulus package signed into law by President Trump, agreed on by the Congress in order to help people to give that, the $1,200 check that was sent out. I didn't get that $1,200 check. I didn't qualify for it, but
Mhm.
to get for people to get that, but then also have the ability to get you know pauses on maybe mortgages, or to get some level of cash loan opportunity through the payment or the PPP.
Yeah.
Um, all that was helpful, but it's run its course. Airlines getting their stimulus package, they've run
30,
their course.
30,000 people lost their jobs beginning this month.
Yeah, so, like, if you're so what's so mind and I get that there's gotta be some level of political, um, play here, right? I mean, of
There
course,
is. There
see where
is.
it plays out, and it'll play out probably somewhat tomorrow or I'm not sorry, not tomorrow, but some on whenever they have the, vice presidential debate, um,
I think it's
Wednesday.
Tuesday. It was Tuesday.
The vice presidential debate is Wednesday,
Oh, it's
um
Wednesday? Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
It was
So
Wednesday.
when they have the vice presidential debate, um, we'll see how how it plays into the consideration of the topics there. But I'm going to speculate. My thought is maybe you know Trump's thinking in his mind. I don't want to give anyone the perception that the Democrats were responsible for this win,
Mhm.
or that the Democrats were responsible for um, the stimulus being passed through. I want it to be on my watch, and so
And that goes back to the point that we made earlier, and it's been the central theme of this podcast. And hell, it might be the title, "Whole Before Itself." You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like, and as it relates to the policy, process. Because here's the thing, right? So you want to say, well, we don't want to do the stimulus. I mean, I heard it all, during the pandemic, because like, well, if we can't give people, we're paying people not to work. You know what I'm saying? But they have no incentive to go back to work. And honestly, what keeps the economy healthy is consumer spending and consumer borrowing. Small and medium sized businesses borrowing to open, and then consumers taking their income and spending it back in the economy. That's what spurs and growth helps the economy stay healthy, right? So if people aren't getting any income, they can't spend their money, and that it's a never ending cycle. So you're like, well, we're paying people not to work, and they're not going to work. Then it's just going to affect everything. They're not spending; they're just getting money, so they're saving all their money. They're not spending. It's hurting the economy. Fine, that's an okay view, right? My counter to that is, and they say, well, we need to get open. Well, if that's the case, if you need people to get back to work, if you need things to get back to normal, then do what the hell is necessary for that to happen. Make this like there's still no like I feel like there's no central testing plan at all. Like there's I don't know, it's just been completely mismanaged at multiple levels. So it's like you don't want to give people money, but then you don't want to take the bull by the horns and figure out a way to set up a national federal contact tracing testing protocol so that we can get back to normal. As I alluded to or as I mentioned earlier in our talk, Che, the mass daily testing that the NFL is using is I think a good model for the government to look like how feasible is this model, right? How can we implement this? So or at least get, the private company. Can we get our private companies these tests so that each company can function like the NFL functions? Or our public companies. I mean, just the workforce in general. Can our workforce function? So even if you don't have it on a national scale, like different businesses require it of their employees, which will in turn allow people to get back in the office, allow people to get back to work. But I mean, I think the way that this thing has been mismanaged is going to have obviously a snowball effect uh, in the years to come, especially in travel leisure industry. As I mentioned, the 30,000 jobs lost, and that industry is depending on on the stimulus. I think I heard an absurd number of money that they're burning through on a day, and I don't want to say it because I don't remember the exact number, but it's
it's a deficit by 4 trillion.
yeah. Well, I'm
Four,
talking about I'm not even just a dis. I'm talking about um, the airline industry itself. Like through this
oh,
pandemic, has
yeah,
is burning through a specific number of cash on the day to day just to stay afloat. So they need it. Small businesses need it. Middle class families need it. I just feel like you gotta hold before self, put everything aside, and figure out how can we get this done for our people.
and I think, and I'm so like I enjoy this podcast so much because I think it is an opportunity to just talk and have relevant conversation. I think that hopefully relates to Gen Z, and I don't want people to think that um, our opinions are politically swayed one way or the other. I hope that we're speaking facts. Obviously, calling someone selfless versus selfish is a subjective determination.
Yep.
So that's why I said I don't want to call. I'm not calling the president selfish. I'm
Pointing out
saying that
acts with specific actions.
with specific actions, those are characteristics of not being selfless. You can define that however you want it
Mhm.
to be. But he on the counter, he does things that one would perceive as not being selfish, whereas like, hey, going out to see my crowd of people is a non-selfish act. That is me showing that I love those people. I'm not so selfish to not give them the ability to see me.
That's a
Um,
fair point.
maybe that's how one would describe it, right? I mean, but you got to think of like life and death versus appeasing my audience.
Yeah.
And you're right. The theme of this podcast should be the whole before self, because Um, with respect to how all of this has been handled, top down, um, it has been an absolute shit show. Uh,
That's
and
being
it's
nice.
And that's being nice. It's just like from day one, it's just like somebody give us something. And I still remember that press conference. So I was watching the CNBC, maybe trading a little bit of stocks. And I remember the press conference the day where he said, we're gonna have testings at Walmart. And I remember watching him like being invested in Walmart, watching Walmart stock like zoom up. Uh, like, and I was like, testing at Walmart, we're gonna have this and that. And it was like a level of confidence where I was like, man, like, all right, cool. He's got it, like maybe, and then none of it, right? And like there are so many opportunities to put in the what's the military act, Keenan, where the military can start making
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name of it, but I know what you're talking about. Basically, they nationalize businesses to produce, like, it's a wartime thing, and
yeah.
essentially they could have a private business like produce things for the military, but in this case, produce it just took a while to do that as far as like for masks and stuff, and that was a political thing, like that had nothing to do with is this the right thing to do in my opinion, because traditionally Republicans do not believe in like a super like strong overarching government. They believe in like the states' rights, so they didn't want to. I guess they felt like from an ideological perspective, they were overstepping what they stood for. I don't know. That's just complete
And
conjecture. So who knows?
yeah, and who knows? But it's again like the whole before self. It's like, um, who gives a shit about your ideology? Lives are at risk.
Right.
Uh, I mean, seriously, and I mean, and I think that on the flip side, like when it's coming to like the stimulus package, like who cares about your like the only thing is because people will talk about like fiscally conservative and stuff like that. Like run fiscal conservative out of the window when you run up a $4 trillion deficit in 7 months, and on
Yeah.
top of that, you have, and on top of that, prior to this pandemic, I mean, the idea of fiscal conservative has been gone in this administration. So if you're going to get the check from the if you're gonna get a check to help people. Um, and by check, I mean like literally like somebody will check the box to say like you can do whatever you want to do, so
Right.
long. And I get it from a political standpoint. There's a perception that probably that Democrats are throwing in things that are unnecessary into the bill, and
That's
Republicans,
entirely possible, and
yeah, and
vice
that's
versa.
vice versa, yeah. And so I get all that, but to have just a universal statement of we're not going to talk about it anymore. I think the hope is that people can see that regardless, Republican or Democrat, you know, or independent or whatever, to go that far and to just all out say we're not going to have a conversation anymore until
Mhm.
I elected.
If,
It's like
that's that yeah.
or win or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like a call to arms of like better vote for me or else. And it just it's
Yeah,
like, oh man, like you could win this election. You don't have to say that. You could
yeah.
just be like, probably
Like
not
I
gonna get
said, you put money
because
in folk yeah.
you know.
You put money in
So
folks' pockets, they gon' they gonna be happy, and to that point, what he said, we've been critical of it, but it could all be, uh, posturing, right? It could be just a deal-making tactic. Who knows? I mean, that's something I've heard and what I've seen reported, and the commentary on that particular tweet, and then I actually, before we hopped on this podcast, saw a tweet where, he was agreeing with the Fed chair, Powell, that we needed the stimulus, right? So, I say having said all that we've said, it could all just be a ploy, right? In which case, I don't understand. I'm not a politician, right? So to me, it's pretty black and white. But I guess from a politician's perspective, it's gray or green or something. I don't
hey,
know.
Keenan, hey, we can almost. I know we're running short on time, but we can almost end it on maybe you and I just don't know the art of the deal, Keenan. Maybe that's what it is. Who knows?
Wow, that's crazy.
Because
You
either
go ahead
way,
and get that one off, huh?
spin machine. Well, the spin machine's gonna be on either way. I think if it ends up getting passed, it'll be look. The Dems had to concede because Trump put his foot down and said we're not going to get a deal until after. the
Yeah.
election. So the
Yeah,
Dems
if
conceded because
if
they
it
realized
doesn't if it
something
doesn't pass, then it's the Dems' fault because they didn't wanna make a deal.
exactly, and
Pretty
so
smart, I can't lie.
what? But it's gonna be. But I mean, but on the flip
If you
side, you got to
it's smart if you're working in M&A. It's smart if you're dealing with a $1 billion business deal, but
yeah,
we're
people's
dealing
lives.
with people's lives.
Yeah. So, and the other side, and we can leave it off of it, and the same thing. The Dems are going to say, well, we clearly can't get anywhere because he's not going to allow us to come to a deal. And then if they do get to a deal, they'll say, we only conceded because we actually care about the American people. Like, so there's going to be a spin no matter how you look at it. It's
Chess.
just, yeah, it's chess. It's chess. And so I'm not going to, I mean, I can't, I mean, I'm critical to the extent that I think like it's a dangerous move. It's a
Yeah,
really dangerous move to go out there and say, "Hey, we're going to stop conversations for a
yeah,
package that gives Americans money." Like, you better spin it really well,
yeah.
or you better expect some backlash. And that's why it's like, bro, like you could win this election, but you keep telling us why you don't want to win this
You're
election.
shooting yourself in the foot, man. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but
oh,
but yeah, that great talk, man. Man, we could go for probably another hour or 2 talking about this whole thing, I think just kinda staying current, it's been really fun to bounce these ideas and thoughts, and it's really this thing, this podcast has really challenged me to be on top of what's happening and to be open to criticisms, talking to you, hearing a contrasting point of view at times, but again, to our listeners, thank you again for taking the time out to hear us chit chat. We hope to see you next week. And until next time, this is the Quarterback in Your Life podcast.